Most people think rich people are different because of money, because they have more of it, spend more of it, and live in a world that feels completely out of reach. But money is not the difference. Money is only the result. The real difference is something you can't see, something you can't touch, and something no one talks about enough because it doesn't photograph well and it doesn't look impressive on the surface. It's how they think. Two people can earn the same amount, live in the same city, and wake up to the same opportunities every single day. Yet over time, one slowly builds wealth while the other stays stuck, stressed, and constantly wondering where things went wrong. Not because one is smarter, not because one is luckier, but because their minds move in opposite directions when faced with the same choices. When money comes in, one reacts emotionally, spends without intention, and hopes it somehow works out later, while the other pauses, plans, and asks what this decision will cost them in the future. When problems show up, one looks for someone to blame or a shortcut to escape, while the other looks for patterns, lessons, and systems that prevent the problem from happening again. This difference shows up in small moments that don't feel important at the time, in how they spend their evenings, in how they handle discomfort, in how they respond to pressure, boredom, and uncertainty. Rich people don't live by impulse. They live by invisible rules. Rules about patience, discipline, and long-term thinking. Rules that guide their decisions quietly, even when no one is watching and nothing feels urgent. Today, we're not talking about luxury cars, expensive watches, or private jets, because those are just the noise at the end of the story. We're talking about the internal rules rich people live by, the mental frameworks that shape every financial choice, every risk they take, and every opportunity they ignore. If you understand these rules, money starts to behave differently in your life. Decisions become clearer, stress becomes quieter, and progress stops feeling random. Because once you change the way you think, money stops controlling you. You start controlling it. Let's begin. Part 1. Rich people think long-term. I once sat across from two people facing the same decision at the same time, with the same amount of money in their accounts, the same pressure from life, and the same desire to make things feel easier right now. And yet the direction their lives took afterward couldn't have been more different. The first person thought in weeks. He asked himself how to feel better tonight, how to enjoy the moment, how to escape today's stress without thinking too deeply about tomorrow, next month, or next year. And his decision made perfect sense in the moment because short-term relief always feels logical when you're tired. The second person paused. Not because he was afraid, and not because he didn't want comfort, but because he had trained himself to look further ahead than most people ever do. He wasn't asking how the decision would feel this weekend. He was asking a harder question. What does this choice cost me 5 years from now? That single question changes everything. The average person lives inside short timelines, weeks, paychecks, next vacation, next purchase, next break from stress. Rich people stretch their thinking out into years. They understand that most decisions don't hurt immediately. They hurt slowly, quietly, in ways that don't show up until options start disappearing. That's why they don't chase quick wins. They've seen how quick money often creates slow problems, how short bursts of pleasure quietly turn into long-term obligations, and how the excitement of now can sabotage the freedom of later. They don't panic over short-term losses either. When something dips, stalls, or feels uncomfortable, they don't instantly assume they made the wrong decision, because they understand that anything valuable takes time to mature, and progress almost never moves in a straight line. Most people destroy tomorrow to feel good today without realizing they're doing it. Rich-minded people notice the trade-off. While others spend money trying to impress strangers who won't remember their name next week, rich-minded people spend money to buy time, freedom, and leverage, things that keep paying them back long after the excitement fades. They invest in tools that save hours, assets that grow quietly, skills that compound, decisions that reduce future stress instead of increasing it. They understand something critical that most people never stop to calculate. Short-term pleasure is expensive. It comes with hidden costs, debt, stress, dependency, and the constant pressure to maintain a lifestyle that no longer serves them. The bill just doesn't arrive right away. Long-term thinking, on the other hand, is quietly profitable. It doesn't feel exciting in the beginning, It often feels boring, slow, and unrewarding when you're surrounded by people chasing instant gratification. But over time, it compounds into stability, and stability turns into options. Options turn into freedom. This is why rich people can delay gratification without feeling deprived. They don't feel like they're missing out because they're not focused on what they're giving up. They're focused on what they're building. They're trading temporary comfort for permanent leverage. They're not saying no to happiness. They're saying yes to a bigger version of it later. One that doesn't disappear when the money runs out, one that doesn't rely on constant upgrades, and one that doesn't come with regret attached. And that's the real difference. Wealth isn't built by people who always choose what feels best right now. It's built by people who respect the future enough to protect it, even when the present is tempting them to do otherwise. Part 2. They see money as a tool, not a goal. For most people, money is never just money. It's emotional. It's tied to status, to validation, to the way they think others see them, and to the fear of what might happen if it suddenly disappears. Money becomes proof that they matter, that they're doing well enough, that they're safe enough, and because of that, every financial decision feels heavy, personal, and stressful. They don't just want money to spend. They want money to feel important, to feel secure, to feel seen. And when money carries that much emotional weight, it stops behaving like a useful resource and starts controlling the person holding it. Rich people learn to separate emotion from money, not because they don't care, and not because they're cold or detached, but because they understand something most people never stop to consider. Money is not the destination. It's a tool. Just like a hammer isn't the house and a map isn't the journey, money is simply something you use to move life in a certain direction. A tool to solve problems instead of avoiding them. A tool to create options instead of forcing yourself into corners. A tool to reduce dependency on people, jobs, systems, or circumstances that don't serve you anymore. Because when money becomes the goal, every decision becomes distorted. Fear creeps in, greed creeps in, and logic quietly leaves the room. Rich people don't worship money. They don't chase it for attention or measure their worth by how much they have. But they also don't fear it. They don't panic when it fluctuates. They don't freeze when it's time to deploy it. They understand that money is meant to move, to work, and to be directed with intention. That emotional neutrality gives them a massive advantage. When markets shake and uncertainty shows up, they don't react. They observe. They can make calm decisions while others panic because their identity isn't tied to the number in their account. They can invest when others hesitate because they're focused on long-term outcomes, not short-term comfort. And they can walk away when others feel desperate because they're not emotionally dependent on any single outcome working out. This is why two people with the same income can live completely different financial lives. One is constantly stressed, constantly reacting, constantly trying to protect money because it feels like the only thing holding everything together. The other uses money deliberately, strategically, and calmly because it's just one of many tools available to them. Money doesn't control their confidence. It doesn't define their identity. And it doesn't decide their value as a person. In the end, money obeys those who don't need it to prove anything. Those who don't use it to fill emotional gaps. Those who can hold it lightly, direct it clearly, and let it go when necessary. Because when money stops being the goal and becomes the tool it was always meant to be, it finally starts working for you instead of against you. Part 3. They take responsibility for everything. I once heard two people talk about the exact same problem, living in the same city, working under the same conditions, facing the same rising costs and uncertainty, and yet the way they explained their situation revealed why one would move forward and the other would stay stuck. The first person had a list, a long one. The economy was bad, opportunities were unfair. His boss didn't notice his effort. His background made things harder. And none of those things were completely wrong. But none of them changed anything either. The second person talked differently. He didn't deny reality, and he didn't pretend circumstances didn't matter, but instead of pointing outward first, he looked inward and asked a quieter, more uncomfortable question. What part of this is on me? Rich people think this way by default. They don't blame the economy when money is tight. They don't blame their parents for what they weren't taught. They don't blame their boss, their country, or bad timing when progress feels slow. Even when things go wrong, and they often do, they pause before reacting and look inward first, not to judge themselves, but to learn. This doesn't mean they ignore reality or pretend that life is fair. It means they understand a powerful truth most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. You can't control everything that happens to you, but you are always responsible for how you respond to it. The moment you blame something external, you feel relief, but you also give away your power. Because if something else is the problem, then something else has to change before your life can improve. Rich-minded people refuse to wait like that. When they fail, they don't ask who to blame. They ask what they missed. They ask what decision they would make differently next time. They ask what skill they need to learn, strengthen, or finally take seriously. Responsibility is heavy. It means you can't hide behind excuses. It means you don't get to feel like a victim for very long. And that's exactly why most people avoid it. But responsibility is also freeing. Because once you accept responsibility, you gain control. And once you have control, you have options. You can adjust, you can learn, you can pivot instead of starting over. This is how progress actually happens. Wealth isn't built by people who never face obstacles. It's built by people who stop outsourcing blame and start owning outcomes. Because in the end, control is the foundation of wealth, and responsibility is the price you pay to earn it. Part 4. They protect their time relentlessly. There's a moment most people never notice when their days quietly start disappearing, not because anything dramatic happened, but because time was spent in small, harmless-looking pieces that never gave anything back. A few minutes here, a quick conversation there, another notification, another meeting that didn't need to exist, until suddenly weeks feel shorter, years feel faster, and life starts moving without any real sense of direction. Poor people are taught to protect money at all costs, even if it means sacrificing hours, energy, and focus, because money feels tangible, while time feels endless, especially when you're young. Rich-minded people learn the opposite lesson. They understand that money can be replaced, rebuilt, and recovered, but time is the one asset that never returns, no matter how hard you work or how successful you become. Once a day is spent, it's gone forever. That understanding changes how they move through life. Instead of spending time to save money, they spend money to save time, not out of laziness, but out of respect for their attention, their energy, and their future. They hire help, they automate, they outsource small tasks, not because the tasks are beneath them, but because those tasks don't deserve their best hours, because the best hours are rare. That's why rich people become extremely selective. Selective about meetings that could have been emails. Selective about conversations that don't lead anywhere. Selective about environments that drain more than they give. They don't say yes by default. They pause. They think. And very often, they quietly say no. They don't scroll endlessly through other people's lives, absorbing opinions, arguments, and distractions that leave them mentally tired but no closer to their own goals. They don't argue just to be right. They don't stay busy just to feel useful. And they don't confuse motion with progress. Because movement feels productive, but progress is measured. Most people are exhausted not because they're doing too much that matters, but because they're doing too much that doesn't. Their energy is spread thin across obligations, notifications, and expectations that were never questioned, only accepted. Rich-minded people question everything. Before giving their time to something, they ask one simple, uncomfortable question. Is this moving my life forward, or is it just filling my day? If it builds nothing, improves nothing, and compounds into nothing meaningful over time, they remove it without drama, without guilt, and without needing permission. They understand that protecting time isn't selfish, it's responsible. Because every hour they protect becomes an hour that can be invested into skills, relationships, health, and systems that quietly shape the future while others are distracted. And over years, that difference becomes impossible to ignore. Not because they worked harder, but because they chose carefully. Time doesn't reward intention, it rewards priority. And the people who build real wealth understand that the fastest way to change your life isn't to do more, but to protect what matters most, relentlessly, every single day. Part 5. They think in system, not luck. I used to know someone who was always waiting for something to change, not because he was lazy, but because he believed that eventually a lucky break would show up and solve the problems that effort alone hadn't fixed yet. A better idea, a better connection, a better moment. And for a long time, nothing happened. That's how most people live without realizing it. They're not waiting for miracles, but they are waiting for luck. Some external event that finally makes progress easier than discipline. Rich people don't wait like that. They understand that luck is unpredictable, inconsistent, and impossible to build a future on. So instead of hoping for the right timing, they build systems that work even when timing is bad. They design systems that still function when motivation is low, energy is limited, and life is messy. Because motivation fades, emotion fluctuates, and willpower eventually runs out. Systems don't. Rich people don't rely on how they feel on a given day to decide whether progress happens or not. They remove emotion from decision-making by putting structure in place. Automatic investments that happen whether markets are exciting or boring. Scheduled work blocks that exist even when inspiration doesn't. Clear routines that turn effort into habit instead of debate. To most people, this looks boring, but boring is reliable. Luck shows up randomly. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it disappears when you need it most. Systems show up every day. They create results repeatedly, not because the person is special, but because the structure is designed to make progress unavoidable over time. This is why rich people don't gamble their future on hope. Hope is fragile. It disappears under pressure, and it offers no protection when things go wrong. Instead, they design their environment so the right choices become the easiest ones. Distractions are removed. Priorities are scheduled. Decisions are simplified. Success stops being a dramatic moment and becomes a quiet pattern, and over time, that pattern compounds. What looks like luck from the outside is usually the result of systems quietly running in the background for years. Not exciting, not glamorous, but dependable, and dependable is what builds wealth. Part 6. They comfortable with discomfort. There's a moment in every life when growth quietly asks for a price, and that price is never money, never luck, and never timing, but discomfort, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly and doesn't come with guarantees. Learning feels uncomfortable, not because it's difficult, but because it forces you to admit that you don't know as much as you thought you did. And that realization alone is enough to stop most people before they ever begin. Starting feels uncomfortable because it exposes you to uncertainty, to judgment, and to the possibility that your effort might not lead anywhere, at least not right away. And being misunderstood feels uncomfortable in a deeper way, because it separates you from the familiar approval of others and places you alone with your own decisions. Most people spend their lives avoiding these feelings. They look for comfort, reassurance, and routines that feel safe, not realizing that safety can slowly turn into a cage when nothing inside it is growing. Rich-minded people don't avoid discomfort. They expect it. They understand that when something feels hard, awkward, or uncertain, it often means they're standing at the edge of expansion, not failure. When things feel uncomfortable, they don't panic or assume something has gone wrong. They pause, they observe, and they remind themselves that comfort has never been the path to progress. They're willing to look foolish in the beginning, to ask questions that make them sound inexperienced, and to show up before they feel ready, knowing that mastery only comes after many imperfect starts. They're willing to fail quietly, without announcing it, without blaming anyone, and without turning setbacks into excuses, because they see failure not as a personal flaw, but as information. Information about what doesn't work. Information about what needs adjustment. Information about what to try next. They're also willing to be alone while building. Not isolated in a dramatic way, but separated from the crowd that chooses ease over effort and approval over progress. While others are relaxing, scrolling, and waiting for motivation, they're working through confusion, doubt, and resistance, often with no applause and no immediate reward. Comfort is seductive. It feels earned. It feels justified. It whispers that you've done enough for today, that you deserve a break, that you can always start tomorrow. And sometimes, rest is necessary. But comfort becomes dangerous when it turns into a permanent lifestyle. When days blur together, and when potential quietly expires without ever being tested. Most people don't fail because they tried and lost. They fail because they never stayed uncomfortable long enough to see what they were capable of. Rich-minded people make a different choice. They choose temporary discomfort over permanent regret. They choose the awkward conversation instead of the silent resentment. They choose the difficult skill instead of the easy distraction. They choose discipline over motivation, knowing that motivation fades but habits remain. They understand that discomfort doesn't last forever, but the results of avoiding it often do. Over time, this relationship with discomfort reshapes their identity. Hard things stop feeling threatening. Uncertainty stops feeling paralyzing. And challenges stop feeling personal. They become signals. Signals that growth is happening. Signals that capacity is expanding. Signals that the future is being built quietly, behind the scenes, while others stay where they are because it feels familiar. In the end, the difference between those who build wealth and those who stay stuck is rarely intelligence, opportunity, or talent. It's tolerance. Tolerance for discomfort. Tolerance for uncertainty. Tolerance for the slow, unglamorous work that compounds over time. Because the people who are willing to be uncomfortable for a season are often the ones who never have to live with regret for a lifetime. So if this helped you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Stay focused, stay consistent, and keep building a future you'll be proud to look back on. Your journey continues from here.